So I had this great opening line, but I want to wait a second before I use it. I'm not going to open with it. Instead, I'm going to give just a little backstory on myself first. It's very short. I'm not that old. So I grew up evangelical Christian, and I was one of those weird kids that enjoyed reading the Bible. And I grew up, I went to school, I studied anthropology and linguistics. And there was this one passage from my biblical reading days that grew with me as I studied language. And I want to start there. So it goes like this. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Now, in a linguistics class, this is a funny passage to bring up because what we talk about when we talk about words is a little hazy. Technology has changed the way that we communicate. And when we say words, are we talking about spoken words? Are we talking about text messaging? Or maybe we're talking about those little smiley faces that you can send each other on your phone? Or maybe are we talking about when you like someone's Facebook post? Are all those things words? Technology has changed communications, but it's also changed what it means to be human. And the easy way to say this is when we change our tools, we change ourselves. So here's an example. Notice the next time you're at a park or a restaurant or a church, and there are a lot of people on their phones, texting or scrolling Facebook, instead of engaging with the people around them. We become detached from the people around us. Our tools change us. Notice the next time you want to buy something at the grocery store, you want to buy a toothbrush. You don't ask the cashier about the toothbrush anymore, right? Like Kevin McAllister in Home Alone, right? What do? You pull out your cheat at everything calculator, and you don't even ask about the pros and cons of the toothbrush you have in your hand, right? You say, what is the best toothbrush in the world? We want the best, and we want it with little to no work. Our tools change us. So we don't have to wonder about things anymore and then go ask someone or look it up in a book. Why would I? I have Google in my pocket. If you don't know something, just wait 2 seconds and you will know. But the time between not knowing and knowing is so short that knowing feels exactly like not knowing. So life is meaningless. I'm kidding. I've literally been just laying in bed in the morning, and I'm like, I wonder where Tom Petty's from. I feel nothing. Because there was a time when you didn't know where Tom Petty was from. You just didn't know. And you had to go ask actual people, and they wouldn't know. And then they would be impregnated with wonder, and they would ask other people until one fateful day you would see a girl coming out of a convenience store, and she had a Heartbreakers t-shirt on, and you would run up to her, and you would ask her, hey, where's Tom Petty from? And she would answer you, and she would say, Florida. And a wave of endorphins and meaning would wash over you. And that's how you met your wife. Most humans don't have to wonder at the world anymore. Our tools change us. Richard Saul Wurman, he's the guy that started TED Talk. He says there's an anxiety in the information age, and he calls this information anxiety. He says it's caused by an overwhelming flood of data, much of it unintelligible and much of it from computers. So what happened to the good old days when we talked to each other and read books and libraries were a thing. Don't worry, it gets much worse. Now, the reason that biblical passage is so interesting to a linguist is a philosophical interest. We know that it's not factually true. There was stuff before there were words, right? But it is philosophically interesting because language or words are the beginning of being or consciousness. So I'm going to nerd out about language for a second. We're going to go down the rabbit hole of technology and being and language. And this is the fun stuff. This is the really fun stuff. I'll go quick. So communication has layers of increasing complexity, and at some point communication becomes language. We don't know when, we're not really sure how. So for example, a bird or a monkey may have a call that means danger. It may be a mating call, but it's always one-to-one, right? If they see a track in the sand, that means something was there. Now there are a few animals, there's not a lot, but there are a few animals that can lay false tracks. So they can mislead a hunter, right, by laying false tracks like foxes. But humans are these strange creatures that can make true tracks, knowing that they will be seen as false. And that is the difference between communication and language. Communication's always a one-for-one, a symbol to a thing. Language can tell the truth by lying and lie by telling the truth. Language tells a different story depending on who is listening. Words don't mean to me what they mean to you. Words are an arbitrary and subjective relationship between sound and meaning. So from the first word ever until now, language is a technology that gives the illusion of an actual connection between sound and meaning, but words have always been subjective. So whether you're speaking or writing or using Facebook, there is an inherent disconnect at the root of all language. Now, in oral cultures, they readily accept this because words go in and out of existence at 767 miles per hour, the speed of sound. They're not recorded, they're not written down. And so traveling bards in an oral culture would travel from town to town and they would tell their stories, right? And each time they told their story, there would be some pretty big differences in the story. And anthropologists would ask them, hey, why is it that each time you tell this story, it's pretty different? And they wouldn't even understand the question, because to them, they were telling the exact same story. It wasn't recorded anywhere. Now, in literate cultures where we have writing, language becomes stored in text. And as that technology progressed, we developed catalogs. So, for example, the Gutenberg Bible, the first Gutenberg Bible didn't have page numbers. Then we put numbers on pages, and now we're all reading the same words at the same time, got us all on the same page. And the bards thought going to a park and seeing everyone's nose in a book was a great picture of how technology had separated humanity, those crazy kids and their books. Now, in hyperliterate cultures, or computers, where most words are on a screen, we store and catalog the word. But in hyperliterate culture, the rate of input and access is increased to the point that we return words to an ethereal form. In other words, we can't keep track of what we know or what we wrote. So, for example, go try to find a Facebook post that you wrote 6 months ago. Good luck. It's hard. So the platforms have changed, but language still leaves us disconnected as ever. It's just that it's much easier to see the disconnectedness for those of us that remember life before cell phones. So we have the picture of a park. Everyone's invested in their phones, they're scrolling Facebook or text messaging. But that's unsettling because it reminds us of the disconnectedness we feel underneath all language. Language is an arbitrary and subjective relationship, but don't worry, it gets much worse. Because there's a nothingness inherent to language. There's a point where the increasing complexity of language causes a subjective experience and brings us to consciousness, being. And in Sartre's view of consciousness, he makes a distinction between being of itself and being for itself. And this is interesting because a being that's of itself, an example would be a rock, right? A rock doesn't sit and contemplate its rockiness. It's not Sylvester Stallone. A being for itself, though, can reflect on itself as a being. It can think, hey, I'm a thing, but in order to do that, it has to be removed. So it can look at itself and say, that's me. Beings like that are disconnected from themselves. So I love this experiment, and I've probably done it here before, but I'll ask everyone to close it. We won't do it this morning, but I ask everyone to close their eyes, and I say, okay, imagine that you don't exist, and just raise your hand when you can imagine it, you know. And every once in a while, there's a couple of people that will raise their hand and say, yeah, I imagine not existing. And of course, the follow-up question is, well, who imagined you not existing? You did, of course. Language demands distance. So when we walk into the park or the restaurant or the church, with everyone looking at their phone, we see a public space in which everyone is disconnected, they're self-involved, and at the same time, it is hauntingly similar to the disconnectedness intrinsic to the human experience, the lack in being. So humanity is not only separate from each other, but my language is not only ambiguous to others, but I am ambiguous to myself. Philip loves the story of Albert Camus, talks about the myth of Sisyphus, and Sisyphus is doomed to an eternity of rolling a boulder up a hill, and it always rolls down. He's just rolling this boulder. He's rolling this boulder. And Camus says that the way that he escapes this eternal terror of meaninglessness, of rolling this boulder, is by finding meaning in rolling the boulder. I always ask when Phil and I have our little talks, I say, but don't we make meaning regardless? I mean, you can throw anything at me and I will make it meaningful somehow. I think the trap actually isn't in the meaninglessness of life. I think the trap is in making meaning. Humanity is trapped in the meaning-making business. So, in the beginning, just go with me for a second, was the word or text message or smiley face on Facebook. It doesn't matter. They're all the same. And the word, the arbitrary and subjective relationship between sound and meaning, was with God, so separate from. And the word was God, both separate and part of. That sounds strikingly familiar. In another biblical reference, we hear that God is love, so words and love. But words don't exist as such. They're just a relationship. Love doesn't exist. Words are a virtual reality, as is God, existence, meaning. We can name it whatever we want. It doesn't matter. Now, this might sound like kind of a super nihilistic, hopeless sort of message. But here's the turn. We, Unitarian Universalists, say that we are the love people. But again, love doesn't exist. So how do I explain the reason that I love my son or my spouse when I look into their eyes? Why do the relationships with people we care about seem to carry so much weight? Is it because the stuff that those people are made of is somehow more important to me than other things? Is it their biology, their cells? No, it's who they are, right? It's their personhood, their being. That's what I love. So love doesn't exist. Love brings things into existence so that we see the other as a person. My argument this morning is not a claim as to whether the world is meaningful or not, because I can't know that. And honestly, it's not that interesting. I see all your eyes glazing over. My argument is that whether the world is meaningful or not is irrelevant. The interesting question, the relevant question, is how we experience the world. Because if I believe that the world is meaningful, that all of this is for something, and that there is reason and purpose in the universe, but I do not love, I can't help but experience the world as meaningless. But if I believe that the world is meaningless, that this is all just going to end in a cold death or robots are going to take over, but I love, I can't help but experience the world as meaningful. Love is the thing that brings others into existence. So in the beginning, that's the wrong in the beginning. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So love, God, meaning, is not something supernatural or something out there in the ether. It's not even in here. It's an interaction that we experience when we allow others to come into our world and participate together in this thing we call life. Love is an interaction and participation between beings. So my plea this morning is not for any of us to find absolute meaning in the world. Rather, my hope is that we can participate fully in life, whether it is meaningful or not. Blessed be.